The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody. This is Vitas Casilius from CMC with this month's edition of the CMC Solves webinar series. So very pleased to have you with us today. Today what we're going to talk about is GOT compliance. And what I'd like to do for those of you who don't know how the webinar series works, we do this on a monthly basis. And we try to pick topics that are of interest to us and to you. And we take your feedback as you tell us what are new and interesting topics, and then we modify what we're going to talk about next month to make sure it lines up with what you're interested in. So what we've been hearing quite a lot about is the whole topic of vendor compliance. And what we're going to talk about in the next 28 minutes is the tasks at hand as we see them, the challenges that those tasks put ahead of us, and what CMC can do to help. As always, if you have any comments or suggestions, you can send them to us via email at gbaird@cmcagile.com. There's a post questions or post survey. Sorry, there's a place for you to post questions in the webinar GoToWebinar application. And there's also going to be a survey when you finish the webinar, and that's really where we would welcome quite a lot your feedback about what we can do better, what other topics of interest you want to make sure we cover, and make sure that we get your voice heard in the future webinars. So let's get into it. Okay, so the focus of our regulators has increasingly been to hold us accountable for the acts of our vendors to a greater extent than was ever the case before. And you see it in all of the regulators, not just on the CFPB's part, which we hear quite a lot of people talking about, but if you look at the latest guidelines from the OCC and from the FDIC, they're all saying basically the same thing, which is that they expect you to be able to manage the vendors and their activities as if they were part of your organization, in fact, an extension of your organization. And from the recent actions that we've seen, and we'll talk about in a second, they're finally putting some muscle behind it. So it's no longer the case that you can see no evil and hear no evil and speak no evil if you didn't know your vendors or do things. You're now being held accountable for it to a much greater extent than was ever the case before. So what I want to do normally is I would like to ask you all to give your feedback on this poll question. We're having some difficulty with the GoToWebinar software today, so I'm going to ask you to just take a mental note. I'm not going to be able to collect the data, but I'm wondering if those of you who are on this webinar are yourselves facing an audit of your own third-party relationships in the next 60, 90 days. If you would be kind enough in your feedback to tell us the answers to these questions, then we can try to get that data back to you. I apologize. In fact, if you give me 30 seconds to see if we can fix this, and I'll take this poll online. So I'll put you on hold for less than 30 seconds. Okay, so I've now opened the poll on this question. I'd be curious to get your feedback as to whether your organization is facing an audit of your own third-party relationships imminently. We have many clients who are telling us as we speak that they either are seeing the CFPB during the month of May or have just seen them in April in some cases, or are seeing OCC or CFPB examiners in the next 60 days. Getting some feedback that you'll hear me better if I do this, so hopefully this made it better for everybody. I'm going to leave the poll open about another 15 seconds. We've got a number of respondents. It looks like almost 90% of us are expecting to have an audit of our third-party relationships in the next 60 to 90 days. And I will close now. Thank you for that. So looks like just about everybody here is looking at the same issues, which is impending CFPB or other third-party relationship audits. So what is it they're after? I mean, at the end of the day, when you look at what they're asking of us, they're asking to know that we are treating our customers properly, that we're not sidestepping our responsibilities, but most importantly, that we're in control and can prove to them that the vendors have the same point of view as we do. And what's at stake, of course, is risk. It's risk on a number of different fronts. The strategic risk and the reputational risk to our organizations is obvious. The transactional level of compliance and credit risk are obvious to the operational side, but maybe not so obvious is the customer impact, both of what our actions today are doing and what the third party's actions on our behalf are doing, but actually what it means to our future customer growth, our future profitability, if we're found to be deficient, if there's an enforcement action that's publicized, and all of a sudden we're that guy in the paper that gets told that you guys screwed up, we're going to charge you hundreds of millions of dollars. Here are three most prominent examples, and these are all examples that that were brought to light because specifically not the bank, but the vendors of the bank were found to be deficient in the things that they were doing on the bank's behalf. So I know what we really want, and the reason for this webinar is how do we avoid this happening to us. So clearly what we've always had to do is obtain a copy of the vendor's policies and practices, which includes that whole list on the screen now. And in the past, we were allowed to have a checklist. Maybe we kept it on a spreadsheet where we said, yep, the vendor has assured me they have this. I've seen their hiring policy. They've explained their DR and BCP policies to me. They've confirmed that they're licensed in all the states. I go through this questionnaire once a month with my vendor management team, and annually we do our business reviews. And we have a separate InfoSec audit. All of that's still well and good. The difference now is that those audits have to be provable. So now I get to our second poll question, and I'm curious whether you all are conducting any audits of your own third parties in the next 60 to 90 days. I'm going to ask you to reflect on what those look like. I'm going to open the poll now, and I'll keep it open for probably only 30, 40 seconds. This is a pretty straightforward one. Most clients are probably conducting monthly audits, and the question will be, is the monthly audit process working for you? Is it giving you what you need in order to be able to prove to the regulators that it's satisfactory? So I'll give us another 15 seconds. Again, it looks like the vast, vast majority of us are facing the need to provide these audits in the next 30 days or 60 days. So I'm going to close this poll. Maybe that was too obvious a question. As you all know, if you're doing these audits, it's a hell of a lot of paperwork. There's all these different pieces of materials that we're trying to gather, and having gathered them, more to the point, what do I do with it? How do I prove that I've gathered what I need to gather? Because if all you want is to gather all the information, that's great. But the truth is, if I need to be able to prove it, if I need to be able to manage it, if I need to be able to document the things I'm doing to remediate the problems that I find, then it's leading to most of our clients telling us that they have to change the whole approach from the current manual approach to some other solution that tries to take advantage of automation. So before we show you what we think is the right solution, I'm curious to get your feeling as a group. Do you feel like your current vendor management policies are such that when you're scrutinized, you'll be completely golden, that the CFPB or OCC will walk in and go, that's awesome, you guys got nothing to worry about, in which case I'd rate you a 5. Or if you think you're really worried about it and want to make some improvements, you'd be a 2, and if you're really worried about it, you might even be a 1. So I'll keep that poll open for another, say, 15 seconds. Thank you for your quick responses. It looks like the majority of us, about 2/3, are in the middle of the road, and when you add in the people that are admitting to being on the downside of worried, it looks like 3/4 of us would like to be able to say, I'd like to be comfortable, but I can't say it. So I'm going to close the poll. Thank you for that.
So what are the options? We could continue with the manual effort, and what I've heard some people are doing is they're adding staff, they're creating these new structures. As they add staff, that means you have to add more checks and balances. As you add more checks and balances, that second level and third level of compliance means I need to identify the vulnerabilities and create tests for both second and third level views. And within all of that, I got to create a structure for escalation and a structure for capturing their remediation, and that also involves staff. So the answer I could do it if I just had the resources is one that we hear a great deal. But when people say I want to automate, they basically fall into two categories. Either some variation of an electronic file cabinet where I can upload the documents, I can create a file system, I can then develop all the same checks and balances and vulnerability testing that I do in the manual, because really that's what I have. I still have a manual process. I just have gotten rid of one component of it, which is rather than the documents arriving via fax or hard copy, I'm now going to scan the documents and upload them to something like a SharePoint solution. The good news of that is that if I already have SharePoint, it feels cheap. The bad news of that is that I really haven't automated anything but that one step of uploading the document. What we're hearing, however, and we heard this in spades at our recent industry advisor group meeting, was that more and more often the staffing increases I need are less and less available. And when I do get the staffing and I have to add, that creates more manual processes which are themselves error-prone. And the problem, of course, with all of these manual processes is that provability is much harder, and now it's no longer acceptable to just say I have a Six Sigma level of provability. I'm actually being held accountable to trying to have zero defects. And that zero defect further creates pressure to automate. So what would I automate if I could? I'd like to get my business process management automation to allow the vendors in to give me their documents and capture them, but I'd also like to do a number of workflow automation steps so that when I'm capturing the document, I'm also capturing information about the document that allows me to establish a set of workflow-driven queues with escalation queues, exception handling queues, and remediation queues that make it very easy to both manage with a minimum amount of staff and to create and report from an ad hoc and analytical basis. So I'm going to just stop for a second and ask you very quickly to share what your current approach is. Is it pretty much the manual effort? Do you get the documents into an e-file cabinet? Oops, I have to launch this for you guys to answer. Do you have an electronic file cabinet approach where you basically put all the documents into some form of automated file, or are you further automating with some kind of a business process automation tool? I'll keep it open another 10 or 15 seconds. You guys are good today. Wow, very, very quick. So it looks like we have a small group of people using the business process automation, and the vast majority, or not vast, about 60% of us have some form of e-file cabinet, and a quarter of us are manual or nothing. Okay, good. I'm going to close the poll. Thank you for that. So we have quite a lot of people doing the e-file thing, which is kind of what I assumed. So what are they really asking us to do? We have in place, most of us, some form of a compliance management overall system. And within that, they want to have a vendor compliance capability that allows us to both upload documents and capture information about the things I need to know from the vendor. And then I want a formal policy assessment process where I can identify outliers and examples of remediation that are needed and follow up with that. And in a perfect world, that would then lead to a bunch of different both reporting, exception handling, escalation, and remediation work steps, and then that would all create feedback so I can optimize the process going forward. Now, in terms of managing third-party vendors in collections specifically, I'd like to have the same kind of operational controls at the agency that I have in my own operation. So I want to be able to account for and control their strategy with respect to contacts, and I don't just mean dials, I mean all forms of contact. I'd like to be able to opine on and prove that I'm working with my vendors on the fairness and consistency of the offers that they're making. I like to make sure that the treatments are consistent and fair and take into account things like SCRA and UDAP, and then I'm looking at where I need to disparate impact the right way, and that the third parties are making all the appropriate disclosures by state, by municipality if need be, that I do with my own operation. So if I'm trying to do all of that and I want a vendor compliance management system, what exactly is it that CMC can do to help me? So let's talk about the solution. So you know today what your checklist is for vendor oversight. What we have in our Credibility platform is the ability to take that oversight checklist and deploy it as a series of business rules within a workflow that will create automatic guardrails for you to get the information you need from the vendors, manage it in the context of what do I need to remediate, what do I need to remind people about, and what do I just need to assess and make sure that it is what I think it is. So the way our process works is that you create, using the Credibility platform, that oversight set of questions into a workflow that then allows your vendors to come online to a portal that we would make available to the vendors on your behalf. They then not only upload the documents, but they answer questions about those documents that you want to have as data elements that are then strategizable, if I can use that word, right? Your own vendor management department would review the answers and confirm that the documents are as they were stated by the third party, and you do all of that online, so there's no need for big buckets of paper files and spreadsheets and all of that. In addition to being able to then put in your disposition, and if you want to score the results on an agency-by-agency basis, or if you just want the score to reflect how many people did the steps in the workflow, you can do that as well. And then what you can have is you can also automate the rules that will detect when you have exceptions, so that you can have a report that then tells you your escalation opportunities, your exceptions you need to handle, and then the remediation efforts that are measured, again, on a workflow. So I'll show you how some of that works. So within this Credibility portal that we've got, you have the ability to both define in the sections you see here on the screen, excuse me, you can define the different sections of things that you want to have them answer questions about and or upload documents about, and that each agency would have, you'd have the ability to define for each agency or other third-party vendor which sections you want them to partake in, right? Having done that, you can define the data that you need to capture about each document. So this is an example of licensure within a particular jurisdiction, and you can put in the questions that you want to have the agency fill in. You know, when is the renewal date? Are you active in this jurisdiction? Is there a specific registration document, and if so, can you upload that document and any comments that you have? Maybe as simple as that, or there may be more things like who is the liaison you work with in this jurisdiction, who at your vendor is responsible for this relationship, things like that. You then can establish within the platform what you want your vendor manager to do as another companion workflow. And that vendor manager would go through and have the ability to provide their disposition on each of the different documents, and for that matter, all the questions that the vendor has answered. So in this case, the vendors provided financial statements, which I'll show you in a second. They could have even answered in data form. And then your vendor manager is going to say, you know, I've got the document. I'm going to make my own commentary on it, and I'm going to provide the document, right? This is an example of a questionnaire that you can design within our portal, so that in addition to uploading the hard copy of the document, you can ask your vendors to put the contents that you care about into a data readable format, so that you can then have the information to do cross-vendor analyses, or put other workflow steps in place to do exception handling or escalations. Everything that you put into this portal is then auditable, both which documents were uploaded and which questions were answered by each individual vendor, but also at the individual question level, what were their responses to the questions, and which documents and what status are they at on a document-by-document basis. And within each document, a key thing that you lose in the kind of e-file cabinet is the versioning. I may have the documentation for their hiring policy in my SharePoint, but do I have the most recent one? And if they put another one in, do I have to somehow manually get them to tell me how I keep track of which one is the most recent version? That's something that we have automated here within the FlexCollect solution, sorry, the CMC solution for this project. So what you have is also the ability to take the data that you've collected and create reporting that would, at a glance, in this example of this dashboard, at a glance let you look across all of your third-party vendors and across all of the different sections or documents or sets of questions that you're asking them to fill in for you and see where they are. And you can very quickly and easily create what one of our account management team calls a heat map, right? You can set thresholds for, you know, if I'm less than 50%, I want to highlight a particular area, and I got to look at that section. Why is that so hard for so many of my vendors? Or I might look at it specifically on a vendor basis, and in this example we see agency D's having some trouble getting this stuff done, and if I know they've been at it as long as everybody else, then I might want to take some action and reach out to them and say, hey, you know, how do we make this work? Or it could be that agency D just came on board yesterday and they're already making great progress and they'll catch up with everybody else soon. But by having this visibility at this level, I can make the task of managing the process much, much more straightforward. So that's it in a nutshell. Obviously, this solution leverages automation to lower the expense of the actual work and the FTE involved, but it also lowers the audit expense. So when I have to do a readout to my examiner from OCC or CFPB, I can not only demonstrate the controls that I use and demonstrate what it is that's attractive about what I'm doing, but I can also put out the data immediately and very simply and easily for somebody to see. So obviously I automate a workflow. I've got system rules. And the way that I would do those system business rules that drive the guardrails is I would start with what I'm doing today. I would then deploy what I'm doing today into these workflows that we're already doing for our clients here at CMC. And I would then immediately have a better solution that's more easily provable to the CFPB or other auditors, and more easily modifiable as I learn that there are other alternative ideas that they have for me. Now we deliver this, as all our CMC products, through the cloud, so we can put this solution in place very quickly. You shouldn't be looking at less than 30 to 60 days, or sorry, more than 30 to 60 days to put this in place. This doesn't have to be a 6 to 12-month process. This can be a 1 to 2-month process. And with that, you're able to show regulators a win, both that you're making the investment in vendor oversight, you're doing the right kinds of things to ensure that the guardrails are systemic and that they're in place, and that you can assure them that you're going to be compliant and managing the compliance of your vendors to a much, much more effective level than you have been in the past. So what's the return? Obviously, it's risk reduction, it's elimination of errors, which in itself allows you to focus fewer FTE on this manual task. But it's also the flexibility to be able to keep up with changes as they happen. And the data that you're now capturing that you, like I showed you in that dashboard, can quickly hone in on the areas that really need your time and attention. You don't want this to be you. You want it to be something that they write about your competitors, frankly, and not you. So I'm going to turn it into questions right now. I've received a couple as I've been going, in addition to the "we can't hear you" one that I picked up and dealt with earlier in the call. So I've got a question here asking, is this just for collections agencies? Clearly, collection agencies are the third-party vendors that that a lot of us are worried about right now, given the current kind of CFPB-driven angst. But it absolutely isn't just a collection agency product. So this is really vendor document management, and we'd recommend that you manage any vendor and the associated risks of that vendor relationship in a consistent manner. And so, your technology partners like us, or your security providers, or your comms vendors, or whomever would be really just as easy to establish the rules and the questions and the documentation that you require and manage it in a consistent and provable manner using this document management, compliance management solution. Another question, is this just for the CFPB? Obviously, that's the one that's creating the Durham and Strong right now, but the OCC are asking for the same thing. The FDIC are asking for the same thing. And so, no, it's not just an CFPB. It's really, do I want to continue to have manual processes that are fraught with errors that then create more need for oversight, more testing, and more people, or do I want to try to automate business processes and find ways to get more efficient and more provable? Another question, could I manage a vendor's employee roster in this solution? And if so, how would I do that? So the answer is, of course you can. So if this would just be like adding one more form, one more section, if you will, of questions that you ask your vendor to fill in, that would include things like their hire and fire date and their access and authority levels and their any training certifications that you require or whatever, whatever it is you think your auditors will be looking for, and then you publish that workflow into the portal, and then it's now available for all your vendors to fill it out. So last question is, has the CFPB looked at this, and what do they think? And the answer is, well, they will not grant a good housekeeping seal of approval to anyone. The truth is they have seen it. I was just at the CFPB yesterday, as a matter of fact, and we constantly show what we're doing to them to get feedback, and their feedback was very, very positive, which isn't a guarantee that if you do this business with us, you'll be free and clear, because this will make it more apparent if you need work, because the data will be right there in front of you. But one of the things that I'll close with is that the CFPB's comment is always, I'd rather be working with our banks on why they do what they do and how they do what they do, and not so much on what did they actually do. And having a system like this lets you get into the kind of dialogue about why you're doing the things to protect the interests of your consumers and to position your bank as the one that provides the optimal customer experience. So we're out of time. I very much thank you for your interest. Would love to hear any feedback that you have about this webinar. I know we went very fast. If you are interested in seeing the product in greater detail, obviously reach out to us. We would love to show you. And aside from that, I thank you very much, and I wish you a great rest of Wednesday. Take good care. Thanks for your time.